The Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask. A fan novelization. Chapter 1. The dense canopy of the forest loomed overhead, filtering the sunlight into eerie shafts of gold and green. Link's boots crunched against the damp earth as he urged Epona forward, the steady rhythm of the mare's hooves echoing through the silent woodland. He had been traveling alone for days, the weight of past battles pressing against his thoughts, searching for a lost friend. A whisper of laughter, high and mocking, slithered through the trees. Link's fingers twitched toward the hilt of his sword as Epona reared back, nostrils flaring. Before he could react, a blur of color darted from the shadows. A small figure with a grotesque, grinning mask leapt before him, flanked by two floating fairies, one glowing a warm yellow, the other a soft purple. "Well, what have we here?" the masked figure taunted, tilting his head. His voice was sing-song, almost playful, but something in it coiled with malice. "A lost little hero?" Before Link could react, the Skull Kid sprang forward, seizing Epona's reins with surprising strength. The mare neighed in distress, rearing as the masked trickster cackled and leapt onto her back. "Thanks for the horse," he jeered before kicking Epona into a gallop, vanishing into the thick trees. In the same fluid motion, he snatched something from Link's belt, his most precious possession, the Ocarina of Time. Link bolted after them, his heart pounding. The forest blurred around him as he pushed himself forward, feet slamming against the ground. But the Skull Kid was too fast. As Link stumbled over a twisted root, the world seemed to shift. The ground beneath him gave way. He plunged into darkness, tumbling through a void that stretched infinitely in all directions. Colors swirled, shapes twisted and coiled like living nightmares. Time had no meaning here, only the sensation of falling forever. Then suddenly, he landed with a harsh jolt. The ground beneath him felt cold, foreign. The walls around him were narrow and pulsating with an unnatural glow. His breath came in short gasps as he scrambled to his feet, but something felt wrong. He reached for his sword, but his fingers trembled. They were smaller. His entire body was smaller. The Skull Kid's laughter rang through the chamber. "Oh, don't look so scared," he cackled, twirling in midair. "I just thought you'd look better this way." Link screamed as dark energy surged around him, wrapping around his limbs like living tendrils. His body twisted, contorting in ways that defied nature. His skin hardened, his legs shrank, his face stretched into something alien. A hollow, wooden moan escaped his lips as the transformation completed. He collapsed to the floor, gasping. The Skull Kid's mask hovered above him, its empty eyes watching with cruel amusement. "See? Much better." Panic clawed at him, but before he could react, the Skull Kid was gone, his mocking laughter echoing as the chamber shook. The fairies hesitated, floating uncertainly. The yellow one, Tattle, lingered too long and the door shut closed, separating her from her friends. Her glow flickering as she turned toward him. "Great. Just great. Now I'm stuck with you." Despite the sharpness of her tone, something in her voice wavered. Link looked at her, then back at the path ahead. There was no choice but forward. So he ran. The tunnel led him into a vast, dimly lit chamber, its stone walls lined with ancient, time-worn gears. A towering wooden door stood at the far end, its frame arched like the maw of some slumbering beast. Link hesitated, his wooden limbs still unfamiliar, but Tattle nudged him forward. "Come on. No use standing around." With a deep breath, Link pressed against the door. It groaned open, revealing an aging clock tower creaking away like an old windmill. The rhythmic ticking of unseen mechanisms filled the air, a slow and steady pulse that seemed to echo in his very chest. A figure stood at the center of the room, a tall man in a patchwork robe adorned with masks of all shapes and expressions. His face, too, was an unreadable mask of pleasantry and secrecy. He turned toward Link, his smile never faltering. "You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you?" Link tensed, watching as the man took a slow step forward, folding his hands behind his back. "Fear not," the masked salesman continued, for I can help you. I have the means to restore your form, but you must retrieve something very dear to me." His expression darkened slightly, his voice lowering. Majora's mask. Tattle shivered, her glow dimming. "That cursed thing." The salesman nodded solemnly. "The Skull Kid has stolen it, and with it, he brings chaos to this land. If you do not act, the consequences will be dire." He straightened, his eerily cheerful smile returning. "But first, if you wish to regain your true form, you must find the precious item you lost. It holds the key to lifting your curse." Link's mind raced. The Ocarina of Time. The mask salesman folded his hands. "You have 3 days. Bring me what was stolen, and I will help you. Fail, and all will be lost." Link clenched his tiny fists. He had no choice but to face this challenge. He nodded, and the mask salesman's grin widened. "Good," he said, stepping aside. "Time is short." Chapter 2. Stepping out of the clock tower, Link found himself in the heart of Clock Town, a city brimming with life and movement. The sky above was a deep blue, but something felt unnerving, the massive, leering moon hanging far too close for comfort. He tore his eyes away and took in his surroundings. The town was a patchwork of winding cobbled streets, half-timbered houses, and brightly colored banners swaying in the gentle breeze. The people of Clock Town bustled about, preparing for the grand carnival of time. Merchants shouted from their stalls, advertising fresh bread, fine cloth, and strange curios. Guards in polished armor marched in disciplined lines, their eyes sharp beneath the brims of their helmets. Tattle floated beside him, flicking her wings in irritation. "We don't have time to gawk. We need to find that item the Skull Kid took from you and get you back to normal." As Link wandered through South Clock Town, his eyes caught sight of a peculiar figure, a young boy with striking blue hair, wearing a Keaton mask. The boy moved quickly, slipping a letter into a bright red postbox before hurrying away. Something about him seemed off. Without thinking, Link followed, weaving through the crowd. Before he could catch up, the boy was gone, lost in the labyrinth of buildings. Instead, Link's attention was drawn to a small, glowing figure fluttering near a fountain. A tiny fairy, trembling with unease. "Please," the fairy whispered, its voice soft and melodic. "I have been separated from the great fairy. If I am not returned, she will remain shattered and powerless." Tattle groaned. "Looks like we don't have a choice." She turned to Link. "Let's find the great fairy's fountain. It should be somewhere in North Clock Town." The pair made their way through the town, past bustling market stalls and chattering townsfolk. As they reached the northern section, the atmosphere grew quieter. A lush patch of grass stretched out before them, encircled by tall stone walls. A massive tree stood proudly in the center, its branches swaying lazily. Nearby, children dashed about, their laughter echoing through the open space. The area had a serene beauty, but something felt off. The looming presence of the moon cast an eerie glow over the town, its ominous face peering down on everything below. A small wooden playground stood near the great tree, its planks worn with use. A few townspeople milled about, but it was far less crowded than the bustling market district. Tal glanced around warily. "Those kids are keeping an eye on us," she muttered. Indeed, a group of children whispered among themselves, sneaking glances at Link. Ignoring them for now, Link's gaze landed on an unusual cluster of rocks and vines nestled against the wall. Something about it seemed unnatural. As he approached, he noticed a dark opening barely hidden within the foliage, a cave. "This must be it," Tattle said, fluttering beside him. "Let's get this over with." Taking a deep breath, Link stepped into the darkness, feeling the cool air of the cave embrace him. The cave's interior was dimly lit, the walls shimmering faintly as though reflecting unseen starlight. The air was thick with an ethereal energy, and the faint hum of magic vibrated beneath Link's feet. He moved forward cautiously, his eyes adjusting to the eerie glow emanating from the chamber ahead. Then he saw it. Scattered across the chamber floor were dozens of tiny, luminous fragments that pulsed with weak, trembling light. the broken remnants of a once great being. The presence in the air felt sorrowful, as though mourning its own shattered existence. Tattle hovered beside him, her voice hushed. This isn't good. As Link stepped closer, the shards of light began to shift, drawn toward the stray fairy still fluttering weakly at his side. One by one, the fragments rose from the ground, spiraling through the air like fireflies in the night. A radiant golden glow filled the chamber, forcing Link to shield his eyes. When the light faded, she was there. The great fairy of magic floated before them, her form shimmering and ethereal, her hair flowing pink luminescent. Though restored, her expression was pained, her voice carrying the weight of recent suffering. Brave young one, I am grateful. The Skull Kid has done a terrible thing, shattering me and scattering my fragments. If not for you, I would have remained helpless. She regarded Link for a moment, her golden eyes piercing yet kind. The Skull Kid is more powerful than he appears. If you are to face him, you will need strength. With a graceful motion, she extended her hands, and a surge of power flowed into Link's small Deku body. The magic settled into him, granting him new abilities he would need to navigate this strange and dangerous land. Go now, the great fairy urged, and restore that which was taken from you. With a sharp laugh, she disappeared into the waters of the fountain. As her glow dimmed, Link felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had taken his first step on the long road ahead. He turned and exited the cave, stepping back into the cool night air of North Clocktown. No sooner had he taken a few steps when a group of children sprang from the shadows, surrounding him. The same children that had been watching him before. The leader, a red-capped boy with a confident smirk, crossed his arms. "Hey, we've been watching you," he said. "You're pretty interesting, running around town like that." Tattle huffed. "Oh great, more distractions." The boy ignored her, grinning at Link. "Maybe you're good enough to join us. We're the Bombers, and we don't just let anyone in. But tell you what, if you can catch all of us before morning, maybe we'll let you in our club." At his words, the other boys grinned and took off in different directions, disappearing into the streets and alleys of Clocktown. Tattle groaned. "Really? A game of tag?" She turned to Link. "Well, you heard him. Guess we better start running." Chapter 3. Link took a deep breath, steeling himself for the task ahead. The Bombers had scattered across Clocktown, and he had until morning to catch them all. He dashed forward, his Deku legs carrying him swiftly through the twisting streets. South Clocktown was still bustling with festival preparations. Vendors called out to passers-by, and fireworks occasionally lit up the sky. Link weaved through the crowd, spotting one of the Bombers darting behind a row of stalls. He picked up the pace, determined to prove himself. Despite his new form, Link found that his Deku body was surprisingly nimble. His light frame allowed him to dash through narrow alleyways with ease. Though the transformation had robbed him of his sword and shield, it had granted him a new agility that served him well in the chase. He caught the first bomber near the entrance to East Clocktown, lunging forward and tagging the boy before he could slip away. The child groaned in defeat, but gave Link an approving nod before dashing off to watch the rest of the game. One by one, Link tracked down the remaining bombers. He found another near the laundry pool, who tried to scramble up a fence, but wasn't quick enough. Another was hiding behind the stock pot inn, barely peeking out from behind a barrel before Link spotted him. The fourth sprinted through West Clocktown, weaving between townsfolk, but Link's persistence paid off as he finally cornered him near the shooting gallery. Only one remained. The leader, the red-capped boy, was the trickiest. He led Link on a long chase through the winding paths of North Clocktown, doubling back and using the playground equipment to his advantage. But Link was relentless, his Deku body carrying him with surprising speed. Just as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, Link leapt forward, tagging the final bomber just in time. Panting, Link stood victorious as the bombers gathered around him, nodding in approval. The red-capped bomber turned to his group and asked, "Should we let him join?" In unison, the bombers all jumped and shouted, "No scrubs." The leader turned back to Link with an apologetic shrug. Sorry, but we have a no scrubs policy. Tattle hovered beside Link, fluttering as if rolling her eyes. Great. Now, can we move on to something actually important? The red-capped bomber grinned. A deal's a deal. Since you caught us all, we'll share our secret with you. He leaned in and whispered a sequence of numbers, the bomber's secret code. Give this to our guard in East Clock Town, and you can get into our hideout. Link nodded and made his way toward East Clock Town. As he approached the entrance to the hideout, a lone bomber stood in front of a wooden door, arms crossed. You need the code to get in, he said with a sigh, clearly bored with his position. Tattle quickly recited the numbers the leader had given them, and the bomber nodded approvingly. He stepped aside, allowing Link to enter. Inside, Link found himself in a dimly lit tunnel system. The stone walls dripped with moisture, and the faint echo of dripping water filled the air. Small pools of water blocked his path, and he hesitated. As a Deku, he couldn't swim. One wrong step, and he'd sink like a stone. Carefully, he hopped from dry patch to dry patch, using his nimble feet to stay above water. Shadows flickered along the walls, and the scuttling of unseen creatures sent a shiver down his spine. Ahead, a sculptula hung from the ceiling, its grotesque legs twitching. Link crouched low, watching its movements before dashing past as it momentarily shifted position. His heart pounded, but he made it through unscathed. After navigating the treacherous tunnels and dodging more sculptulas, Link finally emerged into a vast chamber. A grand observatory stood before him, its towering walls lined with ancient stone and glimmering with a faint light of the stars. He had made it. Inside the observatory, Link was met by an old man in a flowing robe, his long beard swaying as he turned to face the young visitor. Oh, a young bomber, I presume? You must be here to look through the telescope. Please go ahead. Link hesitated but nodded, stepping forward as the old man gestured toward the massive brass telescope positioned by a large window. Climbing onto the stool, Link pressed his eye to the lens and adjusted the focus. The view expanded, revealing the clock tower standing tall against the evening sky. But at its peak, hunched over and grinning wickedly, was the Skull Kid. He seemed unaware at first, but then, suddenly, he turned his head and looked straight into the telescope's lens, as though he could see Link watching him. He cocked his head to the side before breaking into a mocking dance, waving his arms in exaggerated movements before bursting into laughter. Then, without warning, a bright blue streak shot down from the sky. Link barely had time to react as it plummeted straight from the moon, hurtling toward the ground. A tremendous crash followed, shaking the observatory as the impact sent a shockwave through the earth. The old man gasped. Oh dear, what could that have been? He stroked his beard thoughtfully, then muttered, I bet that Skull Kid is behind this. I've seen him hanging around the clock tower the past 2 days, always up to some mischief. Link hurried outside to investigate. Near the impact site, he found a small, shimmering blue gemstone, the moon's tear. As he picked it up, the gem glowed faintly in his palm. Tattle groaned, exasperated. Oh, come on. We finally found Skull Kid, and you're getting distracted by shiny rocks? We need to get to the clock tower before our 3 days are up. Link nodded, gripping the moon's tear tightly. As he gazed up at the sky, his stomach twisted with unease. The moon loomed even closer now, its menacing, grinning face casting an ominous shadow over Clock Town. The festival was approaching, but so was something far worse. Chapter 4. Link stepped back into South Clock Town, the warm afternoon sun casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. The vibrant energy that had once filled the town seemed to be dwindling. Though a few festival-goers still bustled about, their movements felt more hurried, their conversations tinged with unease. The looming moon, ever closer, cast an ominous presence over the festivities. Determined, Link set out to find a way up the clock tower. The massive structure stood in the center of town, its stonework ancient yet sturdy, rising high above everything else. If the Skull Kid had reached the top, there had to be a way. He first searched for stairs, but none existed, only a heavy wooden door at the base, slightly ajar. Stepping inside, he found the dimly lit interior occupied by the strange masked salesman. The eerie man simply smiled at Link, offering no assistance, as if he was waiting for something else. Link hesitated for a moment before stepping back outside, realizing that the salesman would be of no help. He scoured the nearby buildings, approaching townspeople in hopes of finding another entrance. But each person he neared only muttered about the moon and evacuating, too preoccupied with their fear to pay him any attention. Some simply suggested that he should think about leaving too. Frustration built as the hours passed. He tried climbing crates stacked near the shops, leaping toward a low-hanging balcony, but his Deku body was too small and weak to pull himself up. He scanned the rooftops, looking for a path, but every route seemed blocked or too high to reach. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the town's atmosphere had changed drastically. The once bustling streets were nearly abandoned. Vendors had packed away their goods, their stalls standing eerily empty. Paper lanterns swayed in the evening breeze, their warm glow doing little to dispel the growing dread in the air. The festival decorations, which had once promised joy and celebration, now seemed like empty remnants of a town on the verge of despair. Only a few figures remained in the plaza. A stubborn old man stood near the town's entrance, shouting at the retreating citizens. "Cowards, the lot of you! The moon won't fall. This is just a trick." His voice carried an air of defiance, though it was unclear if he was trying to convince the others or himself. Nearby, 2 town guards clutched their spears, whispering among themselves. Though they still held their posts, their stiff expressions betrayed their fear. Tattle hovered beside Link, her wings flickering with impatience. "This is bad. Really bad. That moon is even closer than before. What are we supposed to do? Just stand here until it falls on our heads?" Link remained silent, his gaze fixed on the clock tower. The Skull Kid was up there, taunting them from above. But how could he reach him in time? Night finally fell, and fireworks erupted into the sky, bursting in brilliant colors over the town. As the midnight hour approached, the clock tower began to shift, gears grinding and mechanisms whirring as the ancient structure transformed. Slowly, the top of the tower parted, revealing a hidden doorway high above. Tattle perked up, her wings fluttering with excitement. "Look, that doorway. It must lead to the Skull Kid. But how do we get up there?" As Link scanned the plaza, his eyes landed on a large Deku flower at the base of the tower. Tattle noticed it too. "Hey, you're a Deku now, right? You should be able to use that." Just as Link took a step forward, a voice called out from above. "Wait a moment." A shadow swooped down from the rooftops, fluttering erratically. A Deku scrub, weighed down by several large bags, spiraled into the town plaza and landed directly in the flower. With a small grunt, he straightened himself and adjusted his merchant cap. The Deku looked up at Link with sharp eyes. "This is my private plot. For me, and me only." "But—" He paused, his gaze shifting toward the sky before returning to Link. "I'd be willing to part with it for an exotic item. Something truly rare." Link hesitated, then reached into his pouch and pulled out the only thing of value he had, the moon's tear. The shimmering blue gem caught the Deku's attention immediately, and he gasped in delight. "A moon's tear? Oh, what a find! This will do nicely. It's a deal." Without hesitation, the merchant snatched the stone from Link's hands and tucked it away. Then, with a nod of satisfaction, he hopped back into the flower and launched himself high into the sky, his bags trailing behind him as he vanished into the night. Link stepped onto the Deku flower, feeling the petals shift beneath his weight. He took a deep breath and sank into the bloom. A moment later, the flower launched him high into the air. He spread his arms, catching the air with his leaf-like appendages, and glided toward the balcony of the clock tower. He landed lightly and stepped forward through the open doorway. Inside, he found a winding staircase and climbed swiftly, his small feet pattering against the stone steps. Emerging onto the rooftop, he saw the Skull Kid hovering above, silhouetted against the enormous moon that loomed unnaturally close to the earth. Tattle darted forward, her voice urgent. "Tail, The purple fairy flitted down hesitantly, his wings shimmering in the moonlight. Swamp, mount, ocean, canyon, hurry. The four, who are there? Bring them here. He pleaded, his voice desperate. The Skull Kid's expression darkened, and with a cruel laugh, he smacked Tail aside. Shut up, you stupid fairy. Tail gasped, her glow flickering as she rushed toward her fallen brother. Tail. The Skull Kid twirled lazily in the air, his eyes glowing ominously through the cursed mask. He juggled the ocarina of time in one hand, smirking down at them. Well, whatever. Even if they came, they couldn't stop me now, he taunted. Not with the power I have now. The Skull Kid let out a shriek as magic coursed through him, raising his hands high. The ground trembled violently, and the moon started to plummet faster than before. Link, unsure of what to do, instinctively put his hands to his face, and suddenly, a bubble shot out from his snout. Tail gasped at the realization. That's it. Use the power the Great Fairy gave you, she exclaimed. Mustering his strength, Link focused and fired another magical bubble at the Skull Kid. The sudden attack caught the imp off guard, and with a surprised yelp, he dropped the ocarina of time. It tumbled through the air and landed near Link's feet. As he picked it up, a wave of memories flooded his mind, of Princess Zelda, her solemn expression as she handed him the ocarina, the way she tossed it into the moat as she rode away on her horse. The melody of the Song of Time echoes in his thoughts. Tail's frantic voice broke through his reverie. Snap out of it. We have to do something, she begged, desperation creeping into her voice. We need more time. Determined, Link gripped the ocarina tightly. As he brought it to his lips, the instrument transformed in his hands, shifting into a set of Deku pipes to match his current form. With no other choice, he began to play the Song of Time. The melody resonated through the air, and Link felt the fabric of time begin to pull him backward. The world around him blurred, fading into darkness. Chapter 5. The world faded back in for Link, and he found himself standing in the center of Clock Town once more. The bustling sounds of hammering and chatter filled the air, the marketplace alive with energy as if nothing had happened. Tail hovered beside him, stunned into silence. After a few moments, she whirled around, quickly scanning the sky. Her wings twitched as she realized the moon was once again high above, looming ominously but distant. Before they could fully process what had happened, Link caught sight of the blue-haired boy in the Keaton mask. Just as before, the boy hurried to a mailbox, slipped a letter inside, and ran off down the street. Everything was happening exactly as it had 3 days ago. Tail turned to Link, her voice still tinged with disbelief. This is real, isn't it? We actually went back in time. She shook herself from her shock and quickly refocused. That means we have another chance. Come on, we should see that mask salesman. We got your ocarina back after all. Link made his way to the clock tower once more, pushing open the wooden door. Inside, the strange mask salesman stood exactly where they had left him, smiling as if nothing had changed. Were you able to recover it? The salesman asked, tilting his head. Link stepped forward and held up the ocarina of time. At once, the mask salesman's face broke into a wide grin.
Ah, you did it.
You truly have returned. He clasped his hands together before moving to the massive organ behind him. Now then, allow me to teach you something very important. A melody that will heal the wounds of sorrow and bring peace to troubled spirits. Watch closely. The mask salesman's fingers moved effortlessly across the organ keys, playing a slow, somber tune. Link instinctively lifted the ocarina to his lips, mirroring the notes. As he played, he felt a strange sensation washing over him. The world blurred at the edges, and his mind was filled with fleeting images, an eerie vision of Deku scrubs fleeing in distress, their tiny figures darting away into a dark void. A presence lifted from his body, and suddenly, the wooden texture of his skin melted away. When the vision cleared, Link was standing on solid ground once more, feeling the familiar weight of his Hylian form. Before him, resting on the floor, was a mask shaped like the face of a Deku scrub. Link bent down and picked up the mask, turning it over in his hands. The wood was smooth and polished, yet as he touched it, a lingering sadness resonated within. The masked salesman stepped forward, his voice unusually solemn. "That is the power of the Song of Healing," he explained. "It is a melody that I have learned on my travels, one that takes pain and sorrow and seals it away within a mask." Link glanced back down at the mask, the weight of the moment settling in. Before he could dwell on it, the masked salesman suddenly clapped his hands together, his face brightening once more. "But now it is your turn," he said, extending his hands expectantly. "Please, return to me my mask. You did get it back, didn't you?" The moment stretched in silence. Tatl hesitated, looking at Link. Link stiffened as the salesman's hands twitched slightly. His cheerful smile suddenly faltered. The air in the room shifted as his voice dropped into something far more dangerous. "You did get it back, didn't you?" Without warning, the masked salesman lunged at Link, gripping his shoulders and shaking him violently. The sheer force lifted Link off his feet for a moment before the salesman abruptly released him. He turned away, clutching his head with a deep, pained sigh. When he looked up again, his demeanor had changed entirely. His voice was quiet now, yet heavy with something old and knowing. That mask, that ancient, accursed mask. He exhaled slowly, as though gathering his thoughts. "Let me tell you a tale, one that has been lost to time. This is the story of Majora's Mask." The mask salesman took a deep breath and continued his tale. He explained that Majora's Mask was an artifact of ancient times, created by a forgotten tribe that had vanished long ago. The mask was said to hold immense, malevolent power, capable of granting terrible strength to its wearer, but at the cost of their very soul. Legends spoke of great calamities brought upon by those who dared to use its dark magic, until the mask was finally sealed away to prevent its destruction from consuming the world. He spoke of his own quest to retrieve the mask, traveling to the farthest reaches of the land to locate it. He had been fortunate enough to finally obtain it, but his triumph had been short-lived. The mischievous Skull Kid had stolen it, and now its dark power threatened to bring ruin once more. The salesman's tone turned solemn as he bowed deeply before Link, pressing his hands together in desperation. "I am begging you," he pleaded. "Please, you must retrieve Majora's Mask before it's too late. If it remains in the hands of that imp, disaster will surely follow." His voice trembled with urgency, his eyes filled with an unsettling mix of sorrow and fear. "Please say you'll retrieve the mask," the salesman bowed repeatedly. Link nodded. "You will? Wonderful." The salesman's demeanor shifting once more. True to his name, a wide smile drew across his face. "I know you can do it. Believe in your strengths. Believe." With that, Link turned on his heels and opened the large wooden door into the Clocktown Plaza once more. Now better equipped to handle the task before him, he set out on his adventure. Chapter 6. As Tatl fluttered beside Link, the words of her brother echoed in her mind. "Swamp, mountain, ocean, canyon, hurry. The four who are there, bring them here." She still didn't understand exactly what Tail meant, but if there was any chance it could help stop the Skull Kid, they had to follow the clue. The swamp was the first place mentioned, so that was where they needed to go. As Link made his way to the southern gate of Clocktown, one of the guards stood in his way. "Hey, hold on there, kid," the guard said, lowering his spear slightly. "It's dangerous beyond the town walls. Strange things have been happening lately." He looked Link over, ready to turn him away, until his eyes fell upon the sword and shield on Link's back. The guard hesitated, then nodded. "Oh, you're well equipped. My apologies, young traveler. Stay sharp out there." He stepped aside, allowing Link to pass through the gates and into the wilds beyond. Stepping into Termina Field, Link was greeted by a vast expanse that stretched in all directions. The golden grass swayed with the gentle wind, rippling like the waves of a great green sea. A flock of birds took to the sky, their dark silhouettes fleeting against the bright morning sun. In the distance, rolling hills curved into the horizon, dotted with curious formations of stone and wood. Near the edges of the field, wandering creatures moved. Chubby red tektites skittered along rocky ledges, while peahats hovered above patches of earth, their bladed petals spinning menacingly. The distant sound of running water from a nearby river mixed with the occasional rustling of unseen things hidden within the tall grass. There was an eeriness to the landscape, beautiful and alive, yet touched by an underlying tension, as if the land itself sensed the creeping doom above. They traveled south, towards where the swamp lay. As they walked, Tattle suddenly paused, hovering near the trunk of a large gnarled tree. Scratched into its bark was a crude drawing. Link stepped closer and saw a childish depiction of a small figure with a pointed hat and two fairies flanking either side. Tattle's glow dimmed slightly as she stared at it. "We made this," she murmured. Link turned to her, waiting. She sighed and then spoke, her voice softer than usual. "Back before everything got so messed up, Tail and I met Skull Kid one night in the rain. He was all alone, shivering under a tree. I remember how pitiful he looked. We stayed with him, kept him warm. After that, we became friends." Her wings flickered, as if lost in memory. "We used to play together all the time. Hide and seek, tricks on the townsfolk, just dumb stuff. He could be mischievous, yeah, but he was never mean. He was just lonely." She hesitated before continuing, her voice tinged with sadness. "But then he found that mask. Everything changed after that." Tattle fell silent, and Link turned back to the drawing, the etching rough but filled with innocent joy. Whatever happened to the Skull Kid after he got the Majora's Mask, it was clear that he hadn't always been like this. "Come on," Tattle finally said, shaking off the moment of vulnerability. "We still have a long way to go." With that, they left the tree behind and continued towards the swamp, the ominous shadow of the moon watching them from above. Link pressed on, and soon the lush green of the field gave way to damp earth and dense foliage. The entrance to the swamp was marked by a wooden signpost, "Southern Swamp." The air here was thick and humid, the scent of damp moss and stagnant water filling his lungs. The further he ventured, the darker the sky seemed to grow, with twisted trees towering above, their gnarled branches blocking out the sun. Ahead, pools of water shimmered under the dim light, but their color was wrong, deep violet, almost unnatural. The surface bubbled occasionally, and a strange odor wafted from it. Tattle flitted nervously above it. "Yuck. That water looks poisoned. We definitely don't want to fall in." As Link took cautious steps forward, scanning for a safe path, a rustling noise caught his attention. From behind a thick tree, a small monkey peeked out. Its round black eyes studied Link curiously before it spoke. Follow me." Before Tattle could react, Link was already moving, chasing after the monkey as it darted through the undergrowth. "Hey, you can't just run off after every weird creature you see." Tattle huffed, zipping after him. The deeper they went, the denser the jungle became. Thick vines and towering ferns surrounded them, and the winding paths reminded Link of navigating the Lost Woods. The air was alive with the chirps of unseen insects and the occasional distant croak of a frog. Link had to stay sharp, leaping over tangled roots and sidestepping hidden puddles of the strange purple water. Finally, the monkey came to a halt in a small clearing. It turned to Link, its expression serious.
"This way."
"Must help." The monkeys suddenly scattered, their small feet rustling the underbrush as they vanished into the trees. Left in their place, sprawled on the damp jungle floor, was an elderly woman in green robes, her broomstick lying broken beside her. She groaned, clutching her side, and weakly lifted her head. "Oh, my sister. Where's my dear sister?" she moaned, her voice rasping with pain. Link stepped forward, and the woman's tired eyes focused on him. "You there? Please, you must help me," she begged. "The Skull Kid. He did this to me. That wicked child attacked me out of nowhere. And now I can't even move," she groaned, her strength failing her. Tattle hovered closer. "Skull Kid," she muttered. She turned to Link. "We can't just leave her here, but what are we supposed to do?" The old woman groaned again. "My sister, Kotek. She runs a potion shop. Not far from here." She tried to lift herself up, but her body refused to move. Please, find her. She will have something to cure me. Link gave a firm nod before turning back the way he came. Tattle huffed. Guess we're off to find the sister now. With that, the two of them hurried back through the twisting jungle, leaving the wounded witch behind. As Link emerged from the tangled jungle, he spotted a strange, crooked hut perched high in the trees. A wooden ladder led up to its entrance, swaying slightly in the humid breeze. The scent of herbs and something vaguely sweet wafted from the small windows, mixing with the damp, earthy air of the swamp. That must be it, Tal said, flying ahead. Come on, let's hurry. Link climbed the ladder and pushed open the wooden door labeled Kotex Potions, stepping inside. The air was thick with the scent of dried plants and bubbling concoctions. Shelves lined the walls, filled with colorful bottles, sacks of strange powders, and bundles of herbs hanging from the ceiling. Behind the wooden counter stood another elderly woman, identical in appearance to the one they had left in the jungle, though this one looked far more lively. She floated slightly above the ground, her feet barely touching the floor as she stirred a cauldron. When she noticed Link, she turned with a curious expression. A visitor? She mused, eyeing him over the rim of her glasses. What brings a boy like you all the way out here? Tattle wasted no time. Your sister. She's hurt. She said the Skull Kid attacked her, and now she's stranded in the woods. She needs help. Kote's eyes widened behind her glasses. Oh, dear me. That troublemaker again. How could that brat hurt my Komi? She huffed, shaking her head. And here I thought she'd be back by now. That child has been nothing but trouble lately. She turned toward the shelves behind her, scanning them quickly. Well, no use wasting time. Here, this should do the trick. She grabbed a round bottle filled with bright red liquid and placed it firmly in Link's hands. This is my finest red potion. It'll have her up and flying again in no time. Now, hurry back to her before it's too late. Tattle zipped around Link as he secured the bottle. All right, we got what we came for. Let's move. Without hesitation, Link turned and left the shop, climbing down the ladder and making his way back toward the jungle, potion in hand. Link hurried back through the dense jungle, retracing his steps through the twisting paths until he found the clearing where Komi lay slumped against the tree. The monkeys had scattered, leaving only the sound of rustling leaves and the occasional croak of a swamp frog. Komi weakly lifted her head as she heard Link's footsteps approach. Oh, it's you again, she mumbled, her voice strained. Did you bring me something? Without hesitation, Link pulled out the red potion and handed it to her. Komi snatched the bottle with surprising speed, uncorked it, and gulped the liquid down in a single motion. The moment the last drop touched her lips, she shot upright, eyes wide with energy. Yes, Komi is revived, she declared, throwing her arms into the air. Tattle jolted back in surprise. Whoa! That worked fast. Komi stretched, twisting her back with a few loud pops. Ha! Much better. With a flick of her wrist, she conjured a wooden broom from thin air and hopped onto it, hovering just above the ground. She looked down at Link with a mischievous grin. Since you helped me out, I'll do a favor. I run the swamp tour boat, for sightseeing and whatnot, but I'll let you ride for free. It'll take you through the swamp's poisonous waters, nice and easy. She cackled as she spun her broom in the air, then pointed toward the path leading out of the woods. The boat dock is just ahead. I'll be waiting for you there, so don't keep me waiting too long. With that, she shot into the air, twirling around before zipping off toward the swamp. Her laughter echoed through the trees as she disappeared from sight. Tattle hovered near Link, shaking her head. Well, she's got plenty of energy now. The remaining monkeys approached Link, jumping in unison. You can help us. Please, you must help our friend. He was taken by the Deku in the swamp. Tattle fluttered as if rolling her eyes, turning to Link. Is this what the life of a hero is like? Tattle paused for a moment, looking back at the monkeys, then back at Link. Guess I know where we're going next. Come on, let's find the boat that old woman told us about. With their path forward clear, Link turned and started toward the boat dock, ready for whatever lay ahead. Link arrived at the wooden dock where Komi hovered eagerly on her broom, already preparing for his arrival. "Well, what are you waiting for?" she cackled, waving him toward the waiting boat. "Hop in, it's on the house." My way of saying thanks. Link carefully stepped aboard the small wooden vessel, and with a flick of her wrist, Komi sent the boat gliding forward. The swamp's murky waters churned as the boat picked up speed, cutting through the poisonous swamp with ease. As the dense foliage blurred past, the boat suddenly lurched forward, crashing head-on into a massive octorok that had been blocking the path. The creature barely had time to react before it was sent tumbling away into the depths, clearing the way ahead. As the boat glided to a stop, Komi's voice rang out as if carried by magic itself. "Now arriving at Deku Palace. Enjoy your stay, but don't get into any trouble." Link stepped off the boat onto the soft, mossy ground, looking up at the grand entrance of the palace. Massive twisted roots and carved wooden structures rose high above, forming the fortress-like home of the Deku tribe. 2 Deku guards immediately sprang forward, their wooden spears crossed in front of the entrance. "Halt," one of them barked. "The palace is currently off-limits to outsiders." The other guard squinted at Link, tilting his head slightly. "Well, only Deku are allowed inside for today's special occasion. But you, little Hylian, are not welcome." Link frowned, unsure of how to proceed. As he considered his options, a strange sensation pulled at him from within his bag. Something was stirring. He instinctively reached inside and felt the wooden surface of the Deku mask. It was as if the mask was calling to him, its presence almost alive in his hands. Link hesitated for a moment, staring down at the mask in his hands. It felt warm, almost alive, as if it were waiting for him. Swallowing hard, he slowly raised it to his face. The moment the wooden surface touched his skin, an invisible force yanked the mask against him. A terrible pressure wrapped around his head, crushing down like a vice. His vision blurred, his breath caught in his throat. Panic surged through him as he tried to pull the mask away, but it wouldn't budge. A suffocating heat built in his chest. And then, light exploded from his body. Link let out a choked scream as his limbs shrank and twisted, his skin hardening into a wooden texture. His fingers curled, his legs felt lighter, and the world spun violently around him. Then, just as quickly as it began, the pain stopped. He gasped for air, his body trembling. He looked down, his hands were small, stubby, and wooden once more. He was a Deku again. The guards, who had been watching with mild disinterest, now stood up straighter. "Ah, a fellow Deku," one of them said. "You may enter." The other guard nodded, but pointed a sharp spear at Link's chest. "Go straight ahead to the royal chamber. No wandering around, okay?" Link steadied himself, still rattled from the transformation, and stepped forward into the Deku Palace. The Deku Palace was unlike any place Link had ever seen. The structures were built from thick, twisting roots and hollowed-out trees, giving the palace an ancient yet primitive feel. A large bonfire crackled at the center of the royal chamber, its embers floating up into the humid air, casting flickering shadows against the wooden walls. The scent of damp earth and burning wood filled Link's nostrils as he stepped forward. At the far end of the chamber, atop a throne of woven vines and thick leaves, sat the Deku King. He had a small, round body but a bulbous head, atop which rested an ornate wooden crown adorned with golden leaves. His beady eyes darted frantically about, and his entire body quivered with barely contained energy. The moment he spotted Link, he shot forward in his seat, gesturing wildly with his wooden arms. "Ah, another has come to witness the punishment," the Deku King bellowed. "Good. This filthy monkey will pay for what he has done." Link's eyes drifted to the side, where a small cage hung from a wooden beam. Inside, a tiny monkey with white fur and intelligent eyes clutched the bars, his expression desperate. "I didn't do it. I didn't take the princess," the monkey pleaded, his voice high-pitched but firm. "Please, you must believe me." The Deku King slammed his tiny fist against the armrest of his throne. "Silence. You were seen taking my precious daughter to the Forbidden Temple in Woodfall." You lured her away with your lies, and now she is gone. Vanished. His voice cracked with rage, and his body trembled with fury. If she does not return, your suffering will be legendary. Tattle hovered closer to Link, her voice low. This doesn't feel right. The monkeys we met helped us. Why would they kidnap someone? More importantly, did he mention a temple? That sounds like where we need to go, don't you think? Link nodded slightly, his gaze lingering on the imprisoned creature. The monkey gripped the bars tighter, shaking his head. You have to believe me. I was trying to save her. The Deku King, oblivious to their whispered doubts, threw his arms into the air. The thief will suffer for his crime. He will know the wrath of the Deku tribe. Prepare the punishment. Link stepped cautiously out into the courtyard, the cool night air a stark contrast to the heat of the royal chamber. The palace grounds were patrolled by Deku guards, their glowing yellow eyes scanning for intruders. Their movements were rhythmic, predictable, yet still dangerous. Link crouched low behind a bush, waiting for a guard to turn away before dashing across the stone path. Ahead, a Deku flower rested in a patch of soft earth. Link hopped in, feeling its petals wrap around him, and with a burst of energy, he shot into the air. The cool breeze rushed past his wooden face as he spread his Deku glider petals, soaring over the guards below. Navigating carefully, Link weaved through the palace grounds, using the Deku flowers to leap over gaps and avoid detection. His heart pounded as he neared a section of the wall that seemed weaker than the rest. A small hole, just big enough for him to squeeze through, lay hidden behind overgrown vines. With a quick glance to make sure no one was watching, he climbed through. Inside, the chamber was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the wooden walls. The monkey hung limply in his cage, but perked up the moment he saw Link. His eyes widened in desperation. The monkey whispered urgently, "Please, you must believe me. I didn't take the princess. Something is wrong at Woodfall. The princess went to find the source of the poison waters." Tattle zipped forward, her voice hushed. "Quiet. If they hear us, they'll—" But the monkey wasn't finished. His hands gripped the bars, and he leaned closer. "I can help you, but you must help me. There is a song, one that will awaken the path to the temple. Listen carefully." He then hummed a melody, slow and haunting, yet with a forceful resolve. Link pulled out his Deku pipes, mimicking the tune. The monkey nodded, urging him on. The song felt powerful, ancient, like it carried the weight of something slumbering deep beneath the swamp. As Link played the final note, a strange energy filled the air, vibrating through his wooden frame. But before he could react, a voice bellowed from outside the chamber. "Intruder!" The Deku guards swarmed in, their glowing eyes locking onto Link. He barely had time to react before they grabbed him. The monkey shouted something, but it was drowned out by the Deku King's enraged cries. Moments later, Link found himself soaring through the air before landing unceremoniously outside the palace gates. He groaned, rubbing his head as Tattle hovered beside him. "Well," she sighed, "at least we got something out of it." Chapter 7. Now that Link had been thrown out of the Deku Palace, he found himself back at the entrance, lying on the soft ground. Tattle hovered nearby, shaking with frustration. "Great, just great. And of course, the boat is gone too," she grumbled, glancing over at the now empty dock. Link sat up, brushing himself off, and surveyed his surroundings. His eyes drifted toward the towering mountain in the distance, its peak partially hollowed out. A faint ring of smoke curled from the opening, barely visible against the sky. Tattle followed his gaze and tilted her head. "You see that? The top of that mountain is open, and there's smoke coming from it. Maybe that's where the temple is? It looks ominous enough. How did we not notice it before? I guess you were too busy, little hero." Link wasn't sure, but it was the only lead they had. As he scanned the area, he noticed a cave opening across the river, seemingly leading in the mountain's direction. The only problem was the toxic, churning swamp between them. He stepped onto the nearest lily pad, testing its stability before hopping to the next. The pads wobbled under his weight, but they held firm as he carefully bounced across the poisonous waters. When he reached the other side, he stood before the cave entrance, a damp tunnel cutting through the base of the mountain. Without hesitation, he stepped inside. The cave was dim and narrow, the air thick with moisture. Droplets of water dripped from the jagged ceiling, and the rough walls glistened faintly in the weak light. It wasn't long before Link reached the other end, stepping onto a ledge that overlooked more of the swamp. Ahead of him, a Deku flower rested at the cliff's edge. Link stepped into the flower, feeling its petals close around him. With a sudden burst of air, he shot upward, catching the wind with his Deku petals as he soared toward a cave entrance carved into the mountainside. The wind roared in his ears, but he steered himself carefully, landing safely at the entrance. Tatl caught up beside him, glancing warily into the darkness beyond. Well, if that temple is really inside this mountain, I guess we'll find out soon enough. Link stepped inside the cave, and as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, on the other side, he found himself in a vast, open space. The mountain's interior stretched high above him, jagged rock walls forming a massive hollow crater, the night sky dimly lighting the area around him. But what caught his attention immediately was the sickly, bubbling pool of poisonous water filling the bottom of the crater. The air was thick with a sharp, acrid odor, making Tatl recoil mid-flight. Yuck! This smell. This has to be the source of the poison in the swamp, she groaned, fluttering her wings to displace the aroma. The crater, however, was eerily empty, no sign of the temple or anything resembling it. Link took cautious steps forward, leaping onto a floating lily pad before moving carefully along a series of damp, moss-covered logs protruding from the toxic pool. The air was heavy with a sound of buzzing wings as large monstrous dragonflies darted through the space. One of them lunged toward Link, its long spiked tail whipping toward him. Link quickly ducked, letting the tail slice through the air where his head had been just moments ago. He rolled forward onto the next platform and kept moving, dodging another strike before reaching a more stable patch of ground. The creatures didn't pursue him further, returning to patrol their territory above the water. As he pressed on, Link finally spotted something unnatural amidst the natural rock formations, a stone structure, worn with age, yet still standing firm. He approached it cautiously, running a hand over its surface. At its center stood a carved stone slab, etched with an intricate Deku symbol. Tatl hovered closer, inspecting the markings. This looks important. Maybe it has something to do with that song the monkey taught us. Link nodded, stepping back and reaching for his Deku pipes. He took a deep breath and began to play the song as he was taught. The melody echoed through the crater, the sound bouncing off the stone walls and filling the space with a strange, resonant hum. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the ground rumbled. The poisonous water began to churn violently, waves sloshing against the rock walls. From the very center of the crater, something massive began to rise. Stone groaned and cracked as an ancient structure pushed its way upward, shedding layers of grime and moss as it emerged from the toxic depths. The temple stood tall and imposing, its twisted architecture resembling the curling, organic shapes of a giant Deku sprout. Tatl gasped, staring up at the newly revealed temple. That's it. That has to be Woodfall Temple. The rumbling finally settled, leaving the temple standing in the midst of the crater, its entrance looming high above them. Link clenched his fists, ready to press forward. Link stepped toward the edge of the crater, his eyes fixed on the temple's entrance, now standing high above the toxic waters. A single Deku flower rested at the base of the temple, its petals opening and closing in slow, rhythmic pulses. Without hesitation, Link jumped inside, letting the magic of his Deku form propel him into the air. The wind rushed past his leafy frame as he soared upward, gliding over the poisonous swamp. With a final push, he landed gracefully on the stone ledge leading into the temple's gaping mouth. The moment he stepped inside, the air shifted. It was damp and heavy, filled with the scent of mildew and decay. Link reached up and removed the Deku mask. The transformation reversed in an instant. His limbs stretched, his vision sharpened, and his Hylian form returned. He took a steadying breath. As useful as his Deku form was, he needed to be himself for what was to come. The interior of Woodfall Temple was an ancient ruin, carved from massive slabs of stone and overrun by nature. Moss and vines draped over every surface, clinging to the damp, cracked walls. The wooden support beams, long since rotted, creaked under the weight of the structure. Towering trees had forced their way through the temple's foundations, their roots splitting the stone apart, reclaiming the ruin as part of the jungle. The air was thick with moisture, and the distant sound of dripping water echoed through the halls. Tattle hovered beside him, her glow casting flickering shadows across the chamber. This place is falling apart, but it's still standing. Guess that means we're heading in. Link pressed forward, and the temple wasted no time testing him. The first chamber opened into a large, multi-leveled room filled with murky, poisonous water. Broken stone bridges connected patches of solid ground, some missing large chunks, while others were barely holding together. Link took careful steps along the precarious pathways, jumping across the gaps where needed. One jump proved too wide, and he nearly lost his footing. Thinking fast, he pulled out his Deku mask, allowing the transformation to wash over him once more. With his smaller frame and lighter body, he hopped into a Deku flower and launched himself across the gap, landing safely on the other side before returning to his Hylian form. The next chamber was even trickier. A large wooden block sat in the center of the room, covered in thick moss. Link pushed against it with all his strength, sliding it into place to create a makeshift platform. Above him, twisted branches arched over a narrow walkway. He climbed carefully, using the overgrown roots as handholds. Suddenly, something snapped. A vine, disguised as part of the natural overgrowth, lashed toward him. Link barely dodged in time, rolling away as a Deku bobble lunged. Its gaping maw snapped shut, its jagged teeth clamping down on the empty air where he had stood moments before. Link quickly drew his sword and slashed, severing the creature's stem. The head hit the ground and writhed for a moment before falling still. Tattle darted ahead, her glow illuminating another movement in the darkness. Link, more of them. Mad scrubs emerged from the wooden alcoves, their beady eyes glaring as they spat a rapid barrage of Deku nuts in his direction. Link dodged left, raised his shield to block an incoming shot, then charged forward, cutting down the first scrub before it could retreat into its hiding place. The others scattered, disappearing into their burrows. The next corridor was even darker. Strange whispers echoed through the air, and out of the shadows, small shifting figures darted toward him. Black bows, formless creatures of darkness, crawled along the walls and floors, their glowing red eyes piercing through the gloom. Link swung his sword, slicing through the creatures as they lunged. But each time he struck one down, another would slither from the darkness. He pressed forward, cutting a path through them, until he reached the next door. The moment he stepped inside, a heavy stone slammed behind him, sealing the exit. The air grew hot, and a low growl echoed from the shadows. Tattle flitted nervously. "I don't like this." Then, from the darkness, a pair of yellow eyes glowed. A Dinalfos stepped into the dim light, its sharp claws tapping against the stone floor. It grinned, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and drew a massive blade from its belt. Link tightened his grip on his sword. The Dinalfos wasted no time. With a deep, guttural snarl, it charged forward, its curved blade flashing through the dim light. Link barely had time to raise his shield before the force of the strike sent him skidding backward. His boots scraped against the stone floor as he steadied himself, heart pounding. The beast circled him, its yellow eyes locked onto his every movement. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, it slashed again. Link sidestepped the first strike, ducked beneath the second, and countered with a quick swipe of his sword. His blade grazed the Dinalfos' armored hide, but the creature barely flinched. Instead, it roared, bringing its heavy weapon down in a powerful overhead strike. Link threw up his shield just in time. The impact rang through his entire arm, his knees buckling from the force. He grit his teeth, pushing back with all his strength, and shoved the creature away. Before it could recover, he lunged forward, slashing across its exposed side. The Dynalphos snarled in pain and stumbled back, but only for a moment. It retaliated with a spinning slash, its blade cutting through the air dangerously close to Link's face. He ducked, feeling the wind of the strike pass over him, then rolled to the side as the Dynalphos slammed its tail down where he had just been. Link's breathing was heavy. He had fought similar monsters before, but this was different. The Dynalphos was nothing like the Lizalphos he had fought in the past. This beast was fast, relentless, and intelligent. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. The creature lunged again, but this time, Link was ready. He feinted to the side, causing the Dynalphos to overextend its wing. Seizing the opening, he drove his sword deep into its chest. The Dynalphos roared, thrashing wildly as it tried to dislodge the blade. Link held on, twisting the sword before yanking it free. The creature staggered back, clutching its wound, before collapsing onto the cold stone floor with a final, shuddering breath. Silence filled the chamber. Tathel exhaled, breaking the stillness. Phew, that was way too close. Link took a steadying breath and wiped the sweat from his brow. He had won. As if responding to his victory, the doors of the chamber groaned open. The once sealed paths were now accessible, and one doorway in particular revealed something new, a large ornate chest resting atop a stone pedestal. Link approached it carefully. The chest was old, its golden accents tarnished with age, yet it still held an air of significance. He reached down, unlatched the lid, and lifted it open. Inside, resting atop a red velvet lining, was a bow. Its craftsmanship was flawless, its wooden frame polished and reinforced with fine engravings. The string was taut, and next to it lay a small quiver of arrows. Link lifted the bow, feeling its weight in his hands. Tathel hovered beside him. A bow, huh? Looks like we're gonna put that to good use. With his new weapon in hand, Link turned toward the next chamber, ready for whatever lay ahead. Link adjusted the bow in his hands, pulling the string back experimentally. The motion felt strangely familiar, as though his body remembered a skill long forgotten. He had wielded a bow before. Memories of hitting targets from a distance, of drawing the string with steady hands, flooded back to him. Tathel hovered nearby, watching intently. When Link notched an arrow, took a steady breath, and released, the arrow sliced cleanly through the air and struck the target, a thick vine holding up a rope bridge. With a sharp snap, the vine broke, and the bridge groaned as it descended, settling into place with a loud thud. Tathel spun in the air.
Whoa.
That was way too good. You've done this before, haven't you? Link just stepped forward, crossing the bridge, and pressing onward. In the next chamber, an ancient contraption loomed before him. Large gears and stone mechanisms covered in moss, long dormant. At its center, a massive, unlit brazier sat atop a pedestal, surrounded by carved channels leading to strange stone spouts. Tathel floated ahead. Huh? This thing looks important. Near the far wall, a single torch flickered with weak light. If only he could bring that flame to the brazier. His hand tightened around the bow, stepping back. He notched an arrow and held its tip close to the fire. The flame caught, spreading across the arrowhead in a small but steady blaze. Taking careful aim, he lifted the bow, adjusting for distance. He exhaled, focusing, and let the arrow fly. It sailed through the chamber, striking the unlit brazier in the center. The fire roared to life instantly, spreading along the carved channels like veins of molten gold. The ancient machine groaned as gears began to turn, the stone mechanisms rattling to life after centuries of stillness. Then, from deep below, something shifted. The ground trembled, and from distant vents in the temple floor, fresh water surged up in waves, washing over the poisoned swamp water. The sickly purple color faded, replaced by a crystal-clear blue that shimmered in the dim torchlight. The once deadly liquid was now pure, cleansed by the ancient temple's magic. Tathel gasped. Wow, I can't believe it still works. With the path forward now safe, Link stepped into the purified water, wading through its cool depths toward the next passage. After several more winding corridors and carefully aimed shots, he reached the final chamber. The room was vast, its walls stretching so high they disappeared into darkness. Carvings of ancient Deku symbols lined the stone, flickering in the dim light of scattered torches. A single bridge stretched across a deep abyss, leading to a grand stone altar at the far end. As Link stepped forward, the heavy stone door behind him slammed shut. Tattle flinched. The air grew heavy, charged with something unnatural. Link tightened his grip on his sword. He had made it to the heart of the temple, and something was waiting for him. The chamber trembled as something massive descended from above. A blur of movement, a shadow in the torchlight, landed with a thunderous crash before Link. Dust and debris scattered across the stone floor, forcing him to shield his eyes. When the dust settled, he saw it. A towering figure stood before him, clad in ornate battle-worn armor. The warrior's face was hidden behind an eerie tribal mask, its painted markings stark against the dim glow of the chamber. A rhythmic chant filled the air, guttural and strange.
Odelwa.
Odelwa. The warrior began to dance. Swords flashed as the masked warrior twirled, the steel slicing through the air with deadly precision. His bare feet stomped against the stone in a ritualistic rhythm, each movement charged with power. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, he dashed forward. Link barely had time to react. He threw himself to the side as a massive sword struck the ground where he had stood, splitting the stone apart in a violent crack. He rolled back onto his feet, gripping his sword tightly as he faced the warrior once more. The warrior wasted no time. He swung again, this time in a wide arc. Link raised his shield, the impact sending vibrations up his arm as sparks flew from the clash of metal. The sheer force of the blow sent him skidding back.
Odelwa.
Odelwa. Tattle darted around frantically. This guy is insane. What is he even saying? Link had no time to wonder. The warrior leaped high into the air, spinning his swords as he let out another chant. Then he plummeted down, aiming straight for Link. He rolled aside just in time, the warrior's swords digging deep into the ground. Seizing the moment, Link slashed at his exposed side, feeling his blade make contact. The warrior let out a guttural growl but quickly recovered, kicking Link backward with terrifying strength. Link hit the ground hard, gasping for air. The warrior resumed his dance, the chanting growing louder. Quickly, Link grabbed his bow and notched an arrow, drawing it back as the warrior danced. He let it fly, the arrow streaking toward the mask.
Clang.
The arrow bounced harmlessly off the hardened mask, but the warrior staggered for just a brief second. That was all Link needed. He sprinted forward, sword in hand, and slashed at the warrior's exposed legs. A deep gash appeared, and the masked warrior bellowed in fury, staggering backward. Then, in an enraged frenzy, he unleashed a whirlwind of slashes, his swords moving so fast they blurred in the dim light. Link ducked, rolled, and parried, every move a desperate attempt to stay alive. Then he saw it, a moment of vulnerability. Link jumped back and fired another arrow, striking the warrior's chest. The impact made him recoil, arms flinching upward. With a burst of speed, Link charged in. He slashed, once, twice, each blow landing with deadly precision. The warrior groaned, his movements growing sluggish. Summoning every last ounce of strength, Link raised his sword high and drove it straight into the warrior's chest. The masked warrior let out a final, hollow cry. His body stiffened, the chanting fading into silence. Then, slowly, his form dissolved into shadow. The darkness swallowed him whole, vanishing into the ether. All that remained was his mask, lying at Link's feet.